Starvation drives desperate choices, and for Sarah Freeman, a widowed black mother in 1880s Texas, that choice means walking 100 miles across brutal frontier with her 3 dying children to find work. When drought destroys their sharecropping, farm and creditors seize everything. Sarah clutches her last possession, a mysterious locket, and begins the deadly journey that will either save her family or kill them all. After days without food or water, she collapses on the land of Thomas McKinnon, a wealthy white cattle rancher whose discovery of her unconscious body forces him into an impossible decision that could destroy his reputation and fortune. Sarah awakens in the home of a man she believes murdered her husband. Thomas McKinnon stood in his study. His hands trembled as he loaded the rifle. Outside, torchlight flickered through expensive curtains. The mob's voices rose like distant thunder. "Hand her over, McKinnon." Sarah Freeman pressed herself against the far wall. Her 3 children huddled behind her worn skirts. Tears carved tracks through the dust on her dark cheeks. Little Grace whimpered. Thomas faced the window. His empire stretched beyond the glass. Cattle dotted the moonlit pastures. Barns stood solid against the Texas sky. Everything he'd built over 20 years. Everything that would burn tonight. "I won't let them take you," he whispered. Sarah's eyes held secrets that could destroy them both. The torches grew brighter. 6 months earlier, the same Texas sun had beaten down mercilessly. Sarah Freeman's bare feet cracked against the hard-pan earth. Each step sent fire up her legs. The children stumbled behind her. Mary, 12 years old, carried 4-year-old Grace on her back. 8-year-old Jacob dragged a bundle of their remaining possessions. His face had hollowed. His eyes held the terrible wisdom of a child who'd seen too much. The drought had taken everything. Their sharecropping farm lay buried under dust. The cotton had withered. The creek had dried to cracked mud. When the creditors came, they'd stripped the cabin bare. Sarah clutched a silver locket against her chest, the only thing left of her old life. The road stretched endlessly ahead, 100 miles to the town where she'd heard there might be work. 100 miles with no food, no water, no mercy from the burning sky. She'd walked 3 days. Her husband's voice echoed in her memory, his last words before the mining accident, before they'd brought his broken body home wrapped in canvas. "Sarah, if anything happens to me, burn the letter. Don't let them find it." She'd done as he asked. But the words still haunted her sleep. The 4th day brought buzzards. They circled high above, patient as death itself. Sarah's vision blurred. Salt stung her eyes. The children had stopped talking hours ago. Little Grace slipped from Mary's back. She hit the ground hard. "Mama," Mary's voice cracked. "I can't carry her anymore." Sarah knelt beside her youngest daughter. Grace's lips were white. Her breathing came shallow and quick. Sarah touched the child's forehead. Hot as a branding iron. They were going to die on this road. Sarah gathered Grace into her arms. The little girl weighed nothing, just bones wrapped in faded cotton. Sarah stood and kept walking, 1 foot in front of the other, because stopping meant surrender, because her husband hadn't died for nothing. The sun reached its peak. The world wavered like water. Sarah's legs buckled. She caught herself on trembling arms. The locket chain cut into her neck. She thought of the letter she'd burned, the words her husband had written in his careful script. The truth about McKinnon Mining Company. The truth about why good men died in those tunnels. The truth about Thomas McKinnon. Her vision went dark at the edges. The buzzards called overhead. Sarah pushed herself up once more. Grace hung limp in her arms. "Just a little further," she whispered. But her body had nothing left to give. Sarah collapsed beside a wooden fence post. The impact jarred Grace awake. The little girl looked up with fever-bright eyes. "Are we there yet, Mama?" Sarah couldn't answer. The world spun away from her. Thomas McKinnon rode the fence line, checking for brakes. His horse picked its way carefully along the boundary of his ranch. 15,000 acres of the finest grazing land in Texas. Hard won. Harder kept. He'd built this empire from nothing. A man needed to protect what was his. The horse snorted and shied sideways. Thomas pulled the reins tight. Something lay crumpled beside the fence. At first he thought it might be a dead calf. Then he saw the faded blue dress. A woman. 3 children scattered around her like fallen leaves. Thomas dismounted slowly. The woman was colored. That complicated things. The children looked half dead from thirst and hunger. That complicated things more. He knelt beside the woman. She breathed, but barely. Her skin burned with fever. A silver locket lay twisted around her throat. The nearest town was 20 miles away. They'd never make it alive. Thomas looked back toward his ranch house. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney. His foreman, Buck, would be waiting with the day's reports. The hands would want their instructions for tomorrow. Taking in a colored family would cause talk. Bad talk. The kind that could ruin a man's reputation, destroy his business relationships, turn the whole territory against him. Thomas touched the woman's wrist. Her pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. He made his choice. Thomas lifted the woman onto his horse. The children watched with wide, frightened eyes. He spoke gently to them, told them they were safe now, told them he'd help. But as he loaded the youngest girl onto his saddle, he noticed something that chilled him. The woman's locket had fallen open. Inside was a photograph of a man Thomas recognized, a man who'd died in one of Thomas's mining tunnels 6 months ago. The ride back to the ranch house felt like a funeral march. Thomas's mind raced. The woman in his arms might be the widow of James Freeman, the miner who'd tried to cause trouble, the one who'd threatened to expose conditions in the mines, the one whose death had been ruled accidental. Thomas had never met Freeman's wife, had never known about the children. The mining company handled such matters through intermediaries. Clean, distant, profitable. Now James Freeman's family lay dying in his arms. Buck met them at the main house. His weathered face went stone hard when he saw what Thomas carried. "Boss, what are you doing?" "Prepare the guest quarters," Thomas said. "Send for Doc Harrison. You help them people, the whole territory will turn against you." Thomas looked down at the unconscious woman, at her children who watched him with desperate hope. Then let them turn. But as he carried Sarah Freeman into his house, Thomas wondered if he'd just signed his own death warrant. Because if she ever learned the truth about her husband's death, if she ever discovered Thomas's connection to McKinnon Mining Company, she wouldn't hesitate to destroy him. Sarah Freeman was no longer just a dying woman on his land. She was a loaded gun pointed straight at his heart. Sarah woke to the smell of fresh bread. Sunlight filtered through clean windows. Her children slept in real beds with white sheets. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw him. Thomas McKinnon sat in a chair by the window. His hat rested on his knee. Gray touched his temples. Lines carved deep around his eyes. He looked older than she'd expected. "Your children are safe," he said quietly. Sarah's hand went to her throat. The locket was gone. Panic flashed through her chest. Thomas held up the silver chain. "It fell off when I carried you in. Didn't want you to lose it." She took the locket with trembling fingers. James's face smiled back at her from the photograph. Inside, her husband, dead 6 months now in the McKinnon Mining Company tunnels. The irony cut like a blade. The man who'd saved her life worked for the company that had taken her husband's. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas nodded. "Doc says you'll recover. Children too. They just need food and rest." Sarah studied his face, tried to read the truth behind his kindness. Rich men didn't save poor families without reason, especially not families like hers. "Why are you helping us?" Thomas looked out the window. His cattle grazed in green pastures. His barn stood solid against the sky. Everything perfect. Everything earned. Sometimes a man does what's right, even when it costs him. The words sounded honest. But Sarah had learned not to trust easy answers. Over the following weeks, Sarah grew stronger. Her children filled out. Color returned to their cheeks. Little Grace laughed again. Thomas gave them free run of the ranch. Mary helped in the kitchen. Jacob learned to tend horses. Grace followed the ranch hands like a lost puppy. But Sarah watched, waited, learned. Thomas's books were a mess. Receipts scattered across his desk. Accounts left unbalanced. The ranch was bleeding money despite its obvious prosperity. "You're losing profits," Sarah told him one morning. Thomas looked up from his coffee. "Come again?" "Your cattle sales. The buyers are cheating you. Short waits, delayed payments. You're letting them steal from you." She spread the ledgers across the kitchen table, pointed to the discrepancies. Thomas leaned close. His sleeve brushed her arm. Sarah caught the scent of leather and sage. "You can read all this?" "My husband taught me before he died." Thomas grew quiet. Sarah watched his face carefully. Any mention of James still felt like throwing stones into dark water, waiting to see what surfaced. "What kind of work did your husband do?" Sarah's grip tightened on the pencil. "Mining." Thomas nodded slowly. "Dangerous work." He thought he could make it safer. Tried to report problems to the company, guess they didn't want to. "Listen." The silence stretched between them. Thomas stared at the ledgers. Sarah watched him wrestle with something unspoken. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said finally. The words carried weight, as if he meant them deeper than politeness required. Sarah began managing Thomas's accounts. She had a gift for numbers, for seeing patterns others missed. Under her guidance, the ranch's profits climbed. She worked from dawn to dusk, partly from gratitude, partly from need to stay busy, but mostly to learn everything she could about Thomas McKinnon, his strengths, his weaknesses, his secrets. Because Sarah Freeman hadn't survived a 100-mile walk just to play house with the enemy. Elena Vasquez rode up to the ranch house on a Tuesday morning. She sat her horse like she'd been born in the saddle. Dark hair pulled back severe, eyes that missed nothing. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as Elena spoke with Thomas. Their conversation looked heated. Personal. Elena gestured toward the house, toward where Sarah stood. When Thomas came inside, his face was troubled. "That was Elena, my neighbor. She wanted to meet you." "What did you tell her?" "That you're welcome here as long as you want to stay." Sarah nodded, but she'd seen the way Elena looked at the house, like she was counting the cost of Thomas's charity. That evening, Elena returned for dinner. She brought wine and suspicion in equal measure. Her English was perfect, her manners refined, but her eyes stayed hard on Sarah. "You're very fortunate," Elena said as they ate. "Thomas doesn't usually take in strays." "Elena," Thomas warned, "I'm just curious about our guest's plans. Surely she doesn't intend to impose forever." Sarah set down her fork. "I work for what we receive. I don't take charity." "How admirable. And what sort of work qualifies you for ranch management?" The question carried an edge. Sarah met Elena's stare directly. "I can read, write, calculate accounts, more than most can claim." "Educated by whom?" "My husband." "And what became of this learned man?" The kitchen went silent. Little Grace looked between the adults with worried eyes. Mary reached for Jacob's hand. "He died," Sarah said simply. Elena leaned forward. "How?" Thomas cleared his throat. "Elena, that's enough." "Is it?" "Don't you want to know why an educated woman was walking across the desert with 3 children? People don't abandon everything unless they're running from something." Sarah felt the familiar fire rise in her chest. The same anger that had sustained her through the long walk. The same rage that burned every time she thought of James dying in those tunnels. "Maybe I was running toward something instead." Elena smiled without warmth. "And what would that be?" Sarah looked at Thomas. At the man who'd saved her family. The man whose mining company had killed her husband. The man she'd planned to destroy. Justice, After Elena left, Sarah helped Thomas with the dishes. They worked in silence. The words she'd spoken hung in the air like smoke. Elena means well, Thomas said finally. She's protective of people she cares about. She cares about you. Thomas dried a plate slowly. We've been friends a long time. Just friends? Thomas set the plate aside, looked at Sarah with something unguarded in his eyes. My wife died 5 years ago. Our daughter too. Fever took them both in a single week. Elena helped me through that time. Sarah stopped washing. Water dripped from her hands back into the basin. I'm sorry. Elena thinks I'm making a mistake. Taking you in. She says it'll cause problems. Is she right? Thomas moved closer. Close enough that Sarah could feel the warmth of him. Close. Enough to see the pain he carried like a stone in his chest. Probably, but some mistakes are worth making. That night, Sarah lay awake, planning. Thomas McKinnon was not the monster she'd expected. He was kind to her children, generous with his resources, haunted by his own losses. But he still profited from the company that had killed James. Sarah opened her locket, stared at her husband's photograph in the moonlight. James had tried to save other miners, had gathered evidence of unsafe conditions, had written letters to authorities, all burned now, all lost, except for what Sarah remembered, the names James had whispered, the stories he'd told, the truth he'd died trying to expose. She could poison Thomas easily, access to his food, his drink, his trust. But watching him read bedtime stories to Grace complicated everything. Seeing him teach Jacob to rope cattle muddied the waters, feeling the gentleness in his hands when he'd carried her from near death. Thomas McKinnon might work with killers, but he wasn't one himself. Sarah closed the locket, made her choice. She would wait, watch, learn everything she could about McKinnon Mining Company, find the evidence James had died seeking. Then she would destroy them all, including Thomas, if necessary. But she would not become a murderer in the dark. James Freeman's widow deserved better than that. Clayton Reeves arrived on a Tuesday. His black carriage rolled up the main street like a funeral procession. 4 horses, 2 armed men riding alongside. Money that announced itself without subtlety. Sarah watched from the ranch house porch. Something about the man's arrival set her teeth on edge, the way birds went quiet when hawks circled. Thomas rode in from the south pasture that evening. His face was grim. We have a problem. Sarah looked up from the ledgers. The numbers had been good lately. Profits climbing. Debts shrinking. What kind of problem? Clayton Reeves. He's been asking questions in town. About you. About the children. Sarah's pencil stopped moving. What kind of questions? The kind that caused trouble. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He paced the parlor like a caged animal. Sarah found him there past midnight. Tell me about Reeves. Thomas poured whiskey with shaking hands. He buys land, not always legally. Families disappear. Properties change hands. No one asks questions. Why is he interested in us? Thomas met her eyes. Because helping your family makes me look weak, and weak men lose everything. The next morning brought visitors. 3 ranch hands from neighboring spreads. Men Thomas had known for years. Their faces carried bad news. Sorry, McKinnon can't do business with you anymore. Why not? Word is you've forgotten your place. Some lines shouldn't be crossed. After they left, Thomas sat heavily at his desk. The contracts they'd torn up represented thousands of dollars, money the ranch needed to survive. Sarah stood in the doorway, watched him calculate the cost of his kindness. I can leave, she said quietly. No, this isn't your fight. Thomas looked at her, really looked. Past the careful distance she maintained, past the wall she'd built around her grief. Yes, it is. The attacks came slowly, methodically. Business dried up. Credit. Lines closed. The bank sent polite letters requesting immediate payment on loans. Sarah worked the numbers frantically, stretched every dollar, cut every unnecessary expense. But mathematics couldn't overcome systematic persecution. "How long can we hold out?" Thomas asked. 3 months, maybe 4 if we sell cattle early. Thomas nodded, accepted the verdict like a man facing execution. Elena rode up that afternoon, her usual composure cracked around the edges. "Clayton Reeves came to see me." Thomas tensed. What did he want? "My land." Said I should consider. His offer carefully. Said accidents happen to people who make poor choices. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. James had received similar warnings before his death. "What did you tell him?" Elena's smile held no warmth. "I told him to go to hell." That evening, Elena stayed for dinner. The conversation was different this time. Less suspicion, more urgency, like soldiers planning defense. After the children went to bed, Elena turned to Sarah. "I owe you an apology." Sarah waited. "I thought you were using Thomas, taking advantage of his loneliness." "Maybe I was." Elena studied her face. "But not anymore." Sarah's silence was answer enough. "Clayton Reeves destroyed my brother's family 2 years ago, burned their crops, poisoned their well. When they tried to fight back, my brother disappeared. His wife found him floating in the river 3 days later." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah understood why Elena's eyes stayed hard. Why? She trusted slowly. "Why are you telling me this?" Elena reached into her satchel, pulled out a folded letter. The paper was yellowed. The ink faded. "Because your husband wasn't the only one gathering evidence." Sarah's heart stopped. "What?" "James Freeman sent this to me before he died, along with other documents. Proof of what McKinnon Mining Company was hiding." Sarah took the letter with trembling hands. James's handwriting filled the pages. Names, dates, evidence of safety violations. Proof of cover-ups, everything he'd died trying to expose. "Why didn't you use this?" Elena's voice went quiet. "Because I was waiting for the right moment, the right allies." She looked at Thomas, then back at Sarah. "I think that moment is now." Thomas read the letter in silence. His face went pale, then gray, then something harder than stone. "My God. Harold knew all this. My business partner. He knew men were dying and said nothing." Sarah watched him process the betrayal, watched him realize the weight of what he'd unknowingly funded. "Harold's been dead 3 years, Thomas continued. But the company kept operating, kept cutting corners, kept killing people." He looked at Sarah with naked pain in his eyes. "Your husband died because of my money." Sarah had imagined this moment for months. The revelation, the confrontation, the justice she'd craved. But seeing Thomas's anguish drained the anger from her chest. "You didn't know. That doesn't matter. Good intentions. Don't resurrect the dead." Elena leaned forward. "Clayton Reeves owns 60% of McKinnon Mining Company now. He's been using the profits to buy land. Your land, Thomas. That's why he's here." The pieces fell into place like dominoes. Reeves hadn't come for Sarah. He'd come for Thomas. The harassment was just pressure, a way to force a desperate sale. "How long have you known?" Thomas asked Elena. 6 months, since Sarah's family arrived. I've been watching, waiting." "For what?" Elena's smile was sharp as broken glass. "For you to choose a side." Thomas stood, slowly, walked to the window, stared out at his ranch, his life's work, everything he'd built from nothing. "If we expose this, I lose everything. The mining company will sue. The bank will foreclose. 20 years of work gone." "And if we don't?" Sarah asked. "More families die. More men like your husband disappear into those tunnels." Thomas turned back to them, his decision written in the set of his shoulders. Then we expose everything. Let the chips fall where they may. Elena nodded approval. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. 3 days later, Clayton Reeves sent his ultimatum, a handwritten note delivered by armed messenger. McKinnon, you have 48 hours to reconsider your position. Send the woman and her children away or face the consequences. Some mistakes can't be undone. That evening, torches appeared on the horizon, moving slowly toward the ranch house. Sarah counted the lights. 20 men. Maybe more. Thomas loaded his rifle with steady hands. Elena checked her pistol. Sarah gathered the children in the root cellar. Whatever happens, she told Mary, keep Jacob and Grace quiet. Don't come out until morning. Mary nodded. Too young for this responsibility. Too old to need explanation. Sarah climbed back upstairs, found Thomas and Elena at the windows. The torches grew closer. Voices carried on. The night wind. Hand her over, McKinnon. Thomas looked at Sarah, at the woman who'd walked 100 miles to find him, who'd brought truth into his carefully constructed life. I won't let them take you. But Sarah's eyes held secrets that could still destroy them both, because Elena hadn't told Thomas everything. The letter contained more than mining company evidence. It contained proof that Thomas's wife and daughter hadn't died of fever. They'd been murdered by the same men coming for Sarah tonight. And Clayton Reeves had given the order. The torches formed a circle around the ranch house. 20 men on horseback, their faces hidden in shadow and flame. Clayton Reeves sat his horse at the front, calm as a preacher at Sunday service. McKinnon, his voice carried across the yard, send out the woman and her children. This doesn't have to end badly. Thomas gripped his rifle tighter. Elena crouched by the far window, pistol ready. Sarah pressed herself against the wall between them. There's something else, Elena whispered urgently. In the letter, about your wife. Thomas didn't take his eyes off the mob. What about her? She didn't die of fever. The words hit Thomas, like a physical blow. His rifle wavered. What? Elena's voice was barely audible. Your wife found out about the mining company. She was going to expose them. Clayton Reeves had her killed. Made it look like sickness. Thomas's world tilted. 5 years of grief. 5 years of believing fate had stolen his family. The truth was so much worse. My daughter too? I'm sorry. Sarah watched Thomas's face transform, saw the exact moment when sorrow became rage, when a man realized his entire life had been built on lies. Outside, Reeves grew impatient. You have 1 minute, McKinnon! Thomas stood slowly, walked to the front door. Sarah grabbed his arm. Don't. He'll kill you. Thomas looked at her. His eyes held something she'd never seen before. Not anger, something colder. He already did. Thomas opened the door, stepped onto the porch. 20 rifles swung toward him. Clayton. Thomas, I see you've made your choice. I have. Reeves smiled. Then you know how this ends. Actually, I don't think you do. Hoofbeats thundered from the darkness. Elena had sent riders while Thomas talked. Sheriff Martinez emerged from the night with 6 deputies. Their badges caught the torchlight. That's far enough, Reeves. The mob shifted nervously. Some lowered their weapons, others looked ready to fight. Reeves kept his composure. Sheriff, this is a private matter. Murder usually is. Elena stepped onto the porch, held up James Freeman's letter and a thick folder. James Freeman, Thomas McKinnon's wife and daughter. How many others, Clayton? The sheriff took the documents, read by torchlight. His face grew grim. Clayton Reeves, you're under arrest. For what? Murder, conspiracy, fraud. Should I continue? Reeves looked at his men, at the sheriff's deputies, at Thomas standing on the porch with nothing left to lose. You can't prove anything. Elena's smile was sharp as winter wind. James Freeman was very thorough. Names, dates, bank records, even a witness who saw your men at the McKinnon house the night Thomas's wife died. The fight went out of Reeves, like air from a punctured balloon. His shoulders sagged. The mob began dispersing. Nobody wanted to be associated with a losing cause. As the sheriff led Reeves away in chains, Thomas sat heavily on the porch steps. Sarah sat beside him. They watched the torches disappear into the darkness. 5 years, Thomas said quietly. I know. I grieved for them. Thought God had taken them from me. Sarah touched his hand. Grief is grief, doesn't matter what caused it. Thomas looked at her, at the woman who'd walked 100 miles to find justice, who'd found it in the last place she expected. What happens now? Now we rebuild. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the ranch house kitchen reviewing the monthly accounts. The numbers were good, better than good. The scandal had cost Thomas some business, but honest dealing had attracted more. Elena entered through the back door, flour dusting her apron. She'd moved to the ranch after she and Thomas married in the spring. The arrangement worked for everyone. Children are asking about the school supplies, Elena said. Sarah smiled. Elena's integrated school had become the pride of the territory, children of all backgrounds learning together. It was James's dream made real. Thomas came in from the afternoon ride, kissed Elena's cheek, ruffled little Grace's hair as she practiced her letters at the kitchen table. Good day, Sarah asked. Cattle prices are up. New contracts signed. We're doing well. They sat on the porch as evening fell, watched Mary and Jacob chase fireflies in the yard. Grace curled up in Thomas's lap with a storybook. Funny how the worst journey of my life led me to the best place, Sarah said. Thomas nodded. Sometimes we have to walk through hell to find heaven. Elena squeezed his hand. And sometimes heaven is just people choosing to do right when it costs them everything. Sarah opened her locket. James's photograph, smiled back at her. She touched his face gently, then closed the silver case. Peace was a rare thing in this harsh country. But sitting here with her chosen family, watching her children thrive, Sarah felt something close to contentment. Little Grace looked up from her book, held up a drawing she'd made between the pages, 4 stick figures holding hands. Mama, I drew our family. Sarah looked at the drawing. 4 figures, not 5. Her smile wavered. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Grace beamed. Went back to her book. Sarah stared at the drawing. Grace, where's Daddy in the picture? Grace looked up with innocent eyes, confusion creasing her small forehead. Who's Daddy? The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She looked at Thomas and Elena. They'd gone very quiet. Your father, James. Don't you remember him? Grace tilted her head, thought hard, shook it slowly. I can't remember what he looked like anymore. Sarah's hands began to tremble. The locket felt suddenly heavy against her chest. She'd fought so hard to honor James's memory, to find justice for his death, to build something worthy of his sacrifice. But in saving her children, she'd lost him. Grace had been 4 when James died, too young for permanent memories. The hunger and hardship of their journey had erased what little remained. Thomas had become the only father she could remember. Sarah looked at the drawing again. 4 happy figures. Her new family. Her chosen family. Her family without James. The locket fell from her trembling hands. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.